A very good morning to you. The top stories from Sky News live here in the City of London. House price growth slips back in May as new research suggests arranging a mortgage is becoming harder for many people. A crunch deal to raise the US debt ceiling passes through the House of Representatives. Amazon agrees to pay millions to settle two privacy cases against its Alexa and Ring doorbells. Plus, sailing sustainably, the world's first net zero journey for a cruise ship. A very good morning to you, to Ian King live with me, Wilfred Frost, filling in for Ian this week. An hour, of course, of business and economic news from the City of London. House prices fell at their fastest annual rate since July 2009, according to Nationwide. The Building Society says prices in the year to May were down by 3.4%. It comes as hundreds of mortgage deals have been taken off the market in the last week. Joining me now to discuss this is Andrew Harvey, Nationwide's senior economist. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us this morning. So clearly we had seen a little bit of a bounce in house prices in April. May has now reignited the trend of the last 6 to 8 months, one of falling house prices. Is that fair? Does it look like that is the trend downwards and that April was the aberration as opposed to May falling back down being the aberration?
Well, I think what we certainly have been seeing is a little bit of sort of volatility in terms of the recovery, perhaps the recovery faltering just a little bit at the moment. If we think about May, actually, prices were pretty much flat month on month. And if we compare to where we were a year ago, as you mentioned, we're down 3.4%. But that's on a very strong base in terms of house prices were still running at double-digit pace last year. So I think it's more of a picture of somewhat a bumpy recovery. It's certainly true that headwinds at the moment are growing, and certainly in terms of what we've been seeing with mortgage rates, and actually more recently the signs of activity, in fact, a bit of a faltering in the recovery activity as well. Today's Bank of England numbers, for example, showed a surprise fall in house purchase approvals, and they're down about 25% year on year, and also about 25% down compared to where we would have been pre-pandemic. So a relatively subdued picture at the moment in terms of housing market activity.
But I'm really interested that, based on what you're saying there, it seems to me your base case is that the recovery has started, that the worst of any house price correction is in the past.
Well, we are expecting a peak to trough fall of around 6%. House prices are now down around 4% compared to their August peak. So yes, in that sense, we have actually seen quite a lot of the fall we would expect to come through. I think what we're seeing perhaps more recently is perhaps challenging that a little bit in terms of perhaps the conditions are not improving quite as quickly as we might have hoped. The signs earlier in this year are a little bit more encouraging in terms of where mortgage applications were going. I think what we're seeing at the moment, certainly in the short term, is a little bit more turbulence. A lot of that is associated with the rise in mortgage rates we've just seen over the last week or so.
A peak to trough fall of 6% seems incredibly optimistic to me. I mean, what is your sort of forecast for rates from here over the next 12 months for that to play out? Are you expecting mortgage rates to come back down significantly in order to support that, or you think house prices won't fall more peak to trough than 6% if mortgage rates stay where they are, 4, 5, 6% for the next year or so?
I think our thinking over the medium term is that we will see some improvement in mortgage rates. We've got a bit of a bump in the road, I suppose, at the moment, but the labour market conditions are still very strong and very supportive. Unemployment remains low. Nominal income growth is also quite strong. And coupled with some modest falls of house prices over this year, we think that housing affordability conditions will improve over time. But that is conditioned on mortgage rates starting to improve later in the year, which we think will happen once bank rates peak. We do think the market expectations will start to come down. But that is the important factor there is that inflation does continue to slow. And that's the thing which has surprised the markets more recently. So we'll be hoping for more positive news later in the year in terms of a slowing in the rate of inflation. We're expecting bank rate probably to increase slightly from here, perhaps towards 5%, but we think that will be the peak.
And clearly during the pandemic and immediately afterwards, there was quite a bifurcation between urban, suburban and rural properties. Is that now passed? Is everything a bit more uniform again, or are there still those bifurcations?
I think a lot of those factors seem to have fallen away a bit now in terms of importance and what people are looking for, and perhaps patterns of return a little bit more more to usual. But I think certain things like, for example, rail links into major cities are still proving quite important, especially for those perhaps who work a more hybrid working pattern, we need to go into the city a couple of times a week. So we're starting to see perhaps the commuter hotspots and the commuter belt starting to come back a bit. Certainly in terms of what we're seeing in property types, it's still tending to be sort of the larger property types which are proving more attractive, allowing people extra space working from home where they can afford to do so. And it's tended to be smaller property types, especially flats, which have underperformed really over the last couple of years.
Andrew Harvey, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, the US is a big step closer to avoiding a potentially disastrous default on its debts. A bill which allows the government to borrow more money has passed the House of Representatives and now faces an easier path through the Senate before then landing on President Joe Biden's desk. He's urged senators to get it to him quickly. Our US correspondent Mark Stone has the latest for us from Washington.
Well, American politics has a strange ability to create a sort of manufactured jeopardy. Few really believed that the country's politicians would actually allow the nation to default for the first time in its history. But this game of chicken really has gone to the wire. Both sides have been unwilling to move, even to negotiate, until the very last moment so that they could eke out concessions. And to be clear, it is a game which could go wrong. And if a default did happen, well, there would be a genuine global economic crisis. The vote overnight in there for the deal to raise the debt ceiling means that the crisis is closer to being avoided. Congressmen and women found consensus to vote for the deal, which had been hammered out by President Biden and his political foe, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. It passed by 314 to 117. There were concessions on both sides. No one was happy. It was clear in their pre-vote speeches that so many politicians have deep, deep reservations about the level of unsustainable debt that this country is having to take on. The bill will now head to senators. They will probably want to make amendments, but they are very likely to pass it. The crisis will then be averted, this game of chicken over, the debt ceiling raised, the can, though, simply kicked down the road.
Mark Stone there. Worth noting that Wall Street did close lower yesterday. Of course, that deal in Congress came after the close, but you saw the S&P 500 down 0.6%. And just interesting to note that even though that deal has come since that close overnight, that the US pre-market is only up slightly. The S&P futures up about 0.25% of 1%, highlighting that the market had largely expected this debt deal to be extended as tense as it was. Certainly would have been a much bigger fall had it failed than there was a bounce, given that it succeeded. One more step to come, of course, in the Senate, as Mark highlighted. Right, some other stories now. Amazon will pay more than £24 million to settle alleged privacy violations involving its voice assistant Alexa and Ring doorbell camera. US regulators accused Amazon, among other things, of mishandling data gathered by the devices. In response, Amazon told Sky News, "We take our responsibilities to our customers and their families very seriously," adding, "Our devices and services are built to protect customers' privacy and to provide customers with control over their experience. While we disagree with the FTC's claims regarding both Alexa and Ring and deny violating the law, these settlements put these matters behind us." Dr. Martens has reported a drop in pre-tax profits, down 26% to £159 million for the year up to the end of March. The Northampton-based footwear maker has faced a number of marketing and distribution issues in the US and has warned that profit margins will fall this year. But the company did see annual revenues hit £1 billion for the first time. The car market continues to suffer from supply difficulties, according to Auto Trader. This morning, the company posted its full-year results with an adjusted operating profit of £322 million, up 10% on the previous year. I've been speaking to Auto Trader's chief executive, Nathan Coe, and I asked him if the huge price surge of cars has tempered at all, or are they still trading at very good values in any long-term historical comparison?
If they were diamonds last year, they still are this year. I wouldn't say that they've kind of appreciated beyond that, but we haven't seen them come down. I mean, actually, in the last couple of months, prices are ticking forward a little bit from those already high values. So it all comes down to a balance between supply and demand, and supply is still pretty tight. We're not really seeing new car volumes come through strongly, which means you're not getting the used cars coming through, and demand remains very, very high. And I think it is understandable, because if you look at the period kind of post or from COVID to now, there are probably 5 million transactions that in normal times we would have expected to happen across the new and used car markets that haven't. And at some point, you've got to imagine that a lot of those will catch up. So I imagine this might stay the case for a lot longer than people might be ordinarily expecting.
Well, that's interesting, because clearly it's fed through to decent results for you guys once again. Talk us through that, but then your forecast for the year ahead. So you think this can continue for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably summed it up there. So our results, retailers are doing well. We've got lots of consumers turning to Auto Trader to buy their next car. We've got this thing called electric vehicles, which is throwing a bit of confusion into the mix and getting people to do even more research online. And those two things together add up to pretty good results for us, combined with some good execution by all our teams. So if you look at the core Auto Trader business, the website, platform, apps that you would know, that business grew 9% on a revenue basis and 10% on an operating profit basis. And then we did an acquisition last year. So if you add it all up and look at it together, revenues were actually up 16%, and on an adjusted basis, just to remove some kind of one-off charges relating to acquisitions, earnings per share was up 6%. So pretty solid results, and ahead of where people were or in line with what people were expecting. And I think in terms of the year ahead, a lot of those dynamics we see, as you rightly say, remaining pretty similar, actually. We expect consumers to still retain lots of interest in cars. We expect retailers to still be doing pretty well, and we'd expect that to flow through as well. So it is more or less a bit more of the same for the next year as well, which is ahead of what people expected.
And I mean, clearly you mentioned there that supply constrained and people are holding on to their cars as things stand. Is that simply because of a desire to hold on to a car that people have bought, or is it stemming from the fact that the new car market itself is supply constrained?
No, a great question. I think it's more the latter than it is the former. I think people have been forced to hold on to their cars for one of two reasons. One, because they want a new car. A lot of people will, there is a big portion of the market, well, not a massive portion of the market, there's a good portion of the market that will just get their car on a 3-year PCP. They'll buy it new at the end of it, they give it back to the retailer, they swap it for a new one. Well, you've just not really been able to do that, or you've been told there's a 12-month wait on the particular new car that you're looking for. So you're forced into holding it, for up to a year longer than you would normally do. And if you're holding on to it for a year, then you're not part exchanging that car. And those people that would ordinarily look for a 1 or 2 year old car, well, they can't buy a car either, and they've had to hold on to it. So it kind of ripples down. It's really a supply thing. What changes isn't so much the supply. If there is a bit less demand, or if people are looking to hold on their cars for longer, then it'll start to feed through in weaker used car prices. So that's why your first question I thought was very good, because it does balance all things out basically and tells you how it's going.
And in terms of what's holding its value best relative to their initial new price, I mean, clearly there was a huge interest in EVs that has been steadily growing over the last decade. But this constrained supply, does it oddly, in fact, mean that combustion engine cars are having a bit of a renaissance?
Yeah. I mean, you're definitely on it in terms of your forecast at the moment. Petrol vehicles are doing very, very well. Diesel are not doing as well as petrol, but they're not doing badly at all. There's definitely a cloud that's hanging over diesel that isn't the same cloud that hangs over petrol. And interestingly, both those vehicles, if you look 2 or 3 months ago, were doing better than electric. Now, that will surprise you, because you imagine, well, everyone wants an electric vehicle, they're really expensive, there's a lot of demand. Well, interestingly, in the last kind of 6 months, you've started to see the wave of electric vehicle production that's come through in the last few years hit the used car market. And actually, whilst demand was high, supply kind of rocketed past it, and there was a little bit of weakness in electric vehicle prices, which we've now seen stabilise. So you are definitely, I mean, you are seeing strong demand across the board for all cars. It tends to be about supply and demand, and actually for a petrol vehicle, that supply is a bit tighter and the demand's still solid. So you are seeing, strong pricing in those vehicles.
Let's have a look now at the market picture and start with Asia overnight up, but not too significantly. The Nikkei, as you can see, is up nearly 1%. Sort of mixed picture for the rest of the bag, but it comes after sharp declines for the month of May for most of Asia. Korea was higher, but a lot of China-rated stocks were down a lot, and they were down yesterday, so a little bit of a tepid bounce today. In Europe, something similar as well, because you did see negative performance for May, more in the tune of about 4% for the FTSE 100, and starting the month of June well, in fact, improving quite significantly over the last hour. Wasn't expected to see that up now nearly 1.2% for Germany and nearly 2% for Italy. FTSE 100 for you, we are seeing similar picture, slightly improving through the morning, up about 0.5% for the FTSE. If we look at currencies, the pound not moving too much despite that US debt deal. In fact, the dollar kind of gained a little bit earlier in the week as opposed to as the deal passed last night in the House of Representatives. As you can see, in fact, the pound is flat against the dollar at 124. Oil prices, which also declined sharply during the month of May, down 8 or 9%, depending whether you look at Brent or WTI, bouncing a little bit today, up a third of 1% for Brent, trading just shy of $73 per barrel. Let's discuss markets and the economy. Anna Stupienitska, global macroeconomist at Fidelity, joins me. Anna, very good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, why don't we start on that deal last night, which obviously passed the House of Representatives, the US debt deal. Still got to pass the Senate, still got to get signed by the president. But does that alter your outlook for US GDP much, or is it just a sort of relief that it's a risk that's passed?
Clearly, it's a relief. It's some relief for markets, even though markets were not too worried about it. If you look at market pricing, there were a bit of worry in certain segments of the market, but overall, there wasn't too much priced in. But it's a relief in terms of the tail risk being priced out. That really bad scenario is not materializing. In terms of the GDP implications, when we look at the estimates of what these spending cuts might mean for GDP, it's of an order of 0.2%. So it's really marginal and actually much lower relative to 0.7% what we saw in 2011 after the last debt ceiling sort of debacle. And now we can relax. We don't have to think about it, hopefully, if everything passes through this week, until later next year, until after elections.
And so whilst we're talking about the US, there's been quite a lot of data, as ever, over the last couple of weeks, but it's really pointing in different directions now, depending on which part of the economy you're looking at, putting the Fed in an ever tighter bind, because it does still have this ongoing inflation issue, whereas other parts of the economy, Chicago PMI yesterday, are dropping. What is your latest expectation on where the Fed goes from here? Do they squeeze in one more 25 basis point hike?
I think they have tried to adjust their communication recently, saying that June they might take a pause, but then they might still continue hiking. And it's a very difficult environment for them because they focus on the indicators that are lagging, that is inflation and the labor market, the unemployment rate, rather than leading. So leading indicators are showing that the economy is slowing and that tightening that's already in the system is hitting the credit channel. Credit standards are very tight and there are lags, but it's hitting the real economy already. And so the economy is slowing, but when you look at lagging indicators like unemployment and inflation, it's still pretty high. So in terms of the expectations, we think they might actually have to hike more indeed after the pause in June.
And in terms of here in Europe, are we seeing quite a difference now in the prospect for what central banks are going to do, continental Europe, ECB versus Bank of England?
Yeah, I think the key is really in inflation expectations. In Europe, they are stable and pretty well anchored. And in fact, the latest set of data showed that European inflation is slowing, not just on the headline, but on core. And the ECB is pretty lucky, I think, in this respect. They can start thinking about ending the cycle. So perhaps 1 or 2 hikes from them, and then they're done, and they can be patient and to watch what happens to the economy. Here in the UK, for the BOE, the situation is much trickier because you do have the economy slowing in terms of in various parts, but inflation is high. And inflation expectations are showing some signs of de-anchoring. And this is a very dangerous situation for a central bank to be. So they actually might have to hike more than they want.
And then touch on us, Anna, if you can, on the outlook for China from here. I mean, clearly, US tech stocks have continued to perform, but everyone performed in the very early part of this year, in large part on hopes for China's GDP exploding this year. Is that now only a very distant hope?
China recovery is still quite fragile. It's very nuanced and it's uneven. And now we have seen already the benefit of reopening. And so now a lot depends on the policy action. If there's significant weakness in services, which we're not seeing yet, it's mainly in manufacturing. But when we see significant weakness in services, then the government is expected to potentially ease policy, both monetary and fiscal. I think a lot depends on stimulus from here, but we're not expecting a really huge rebound. What we call it a kind of a muddle through recovery in coming months.
Anna, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. I'm just going to pivot away from the business news for some breaking news concerning the deaths in Bournemouth yesterday that we've been bringing to you here on Sky News. We've got a statement from Dorset Police, which reads, quote, "We continue to investigate the circumstances surrounding the tragic incident that occurred yesterday, resulting in the deaths of a 12-year-old girl and 17-year-old boy. We are working with partner agencies to understand what has caused the tragedy. However, early investigation indicates that there was no physical contact between a vessel and any swimmers at the time of the incident. We are investigating the circumstances that caused a number of swimmers to get into difficulty. Further information will be released as the investigation progresses, and we will have more, of course, on that story here on Sky News throughout the day. But still to come here on Ian King Live, why getting a mortgage is more difficult than arranging a wedding as things stand. We'll be right back.
After a lifetime in the spotlight, we all know Harry's feelings on the press.
Prince Harry to give evidence.
Harry's hatred of the British tabloid press is well documented.
The claimants say that those at the very top knew about phone hacking.
It'll be the first time since the 19th century the senior royal has been called to the witness box.
Full coverage on Sky News.
I'm Becky Johnston, a Sky News correspondent, part of the team based here in the Midlands. Allegations of exploitation in Leicester's clothing factories aren't new. In fact, it's been an open secret in this city for years. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
We're getting more and more stabbings, and essentially I think it's more and more younger children. As a team, we're not really surprised by anything these days.
So there's reports of a male who's been stabbed repeatedly in the leg.
Here in the diverse industrial heart of England, we hear from people who have real stories to tell.
Parents are going to complain like this, and schools had better get ready for it.
These protests are being organised primarily by people who aren't parents at the school.
So some patients aren't going to survive this.
We have to be prepared that patients will die from this illness.
Staff here are currently identifying wards that could be turned into areas where patients with COVID-19 could be isolated. The River Severn is still rising, and people here in Ironbridge have been told it could go up by another metre before it starts to go back down.
It's going to be a long, slow process of putting it back together again.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
Welcome back. Well, yesterday we reported here on Ian King Live that hundreds of mortgage deals have been taken off the market in the last week. And today, a new report by LendInvest suggests that people are finding it harder than ever to get a mortgage. Well, joining me now is Rod Lockhart, the Chief Executive of LendInvest. And firstly, just quickly break down for us, Rod, what you guys do that's slightly different to traditional mortgage brokers.
So we're a fintech mortgage provider. That means that we've built and used technology to make the process of getting a mortgage more straightforward. So with other lenders, you might have to fill in tons of paper forms, sign loads of documents, get documents certified, PDFs of bank statements flying backwards and forwards. With us, that process has been completely digitised. So it's a simple, straightforward, faster, more transparent process.
And in terms of how that can help the consumers, are there some areas that traditional lenders sort of rule people out? And
Absolutely right. So one of the mortgage ranges we focus on is providing mortgages to self-employed people, contract workers, key workers, people with multiple sources of income. And the technology that we've built allows us to piece together that income, build an understanding of their income profile of these borrowers and provide them with mortgages.
Really, really interesting. And so let's talk about the broad picture for mortgages at the moment. And I mean, I guess we just mentioned in the intro, clearly rates are ticking up.
Yeah.
To what extent was that to be expected? Almost the anomaly was that they came down a bit in the early part of the year versus taking everyone by surprise in the industry.
Yeah, look, I think that's a fair point. Base rate's up at 4.5%. For example, our cheapest 5-year fixed rate mortgage is currently 5.29%, which in that context doesn't seem unreasonable. But I think clearly consumers, brokers have got used to mortgages being at a low rate for a long period of time. And this adjustment to this new higher interest rate environment is taking time. There was a bit of a shock last week. So when the inflation number came out, clearly markets responded, and there's an expectation that interest rates will now continue to rise beyond 4.5%, potentially to 5.5% later this year, and that has had some effect on the mortgage input costs. So as a result, mortgage lenders have repriced their mortgage ranges, and many of them are continuing to do so.
Clearly, most people have their mortgage fixed to some extent, probably not for the life of the mortgage, but at least initially. So we all debate, where is the current 3 or 5-year fix? Is it 4%, 5%, 5.29 you just mentioned? Is that the key factor, or is what's more important for consumers and, I guess, by implication for house prices, how long we stay up anywhere near that level? And to what extent, the longer we stay here, will we suddenly see waves more people finding trouble and it coming out to house prices?
Well, I think part of the adjustment that we've seen in mortgage prices over recent days is a recognition that higher interest rates are around and likely to be around for a bit longer. So I think that's sort of factored into the mortgage pricing. Banks, building societies, non-bank lenders, when they're looking at pricing mortgages, they're looking at interest rate swaps. And so expectations of what's happening to interest rates over the periods of time in which the mortgage rates are fixed. And it's that part of the market that's moved and giving an indication that the higher interest rates are going to be here for a while.
In terms of, we had the gentleman from Nationwide on earlier who said house prices from peak to trough so far are down 4%, and their forecast peak to trough was down 6%. I mean, does that seem optimistic to you, or does that tally with what you're saying?
That sort of tallies with what we're seeing. So I think some of the heat that came into the market during COVID has come out with the recent falls. For what it's worth, our expectation of peak to trough fall is around 10%. But to put that in some context, that's just some of the house price rise that we've experienced immediately post-COVID with that housing boom.
Great stuff, Rod. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
Good to see you. Right, still to come here on Ian King Live. The world's most sustainable cruise ship prepares to set sail. We'll talk to the executive chairman. Welcome back. As the travel sector continues to recover post-lockdown, cruises have seen a rebound over the course of the last 18 months. But the industry is facing growing scrutiny over its sustainability. MSC Cruises, the world's third largest cruise company, is launching what it claims is the world's most environmentally efficient cruise ship. The MSC Euribia, which is powered by liquefied natural gas, will set off on its maiden voyage from France to Copenhagen this weekend. And I'm joined now by Pier Francesco Vargo, Executive Chairman of MSC Cruises. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. So I guess, as you're saying, it's the most sustainable and environmentally friendly cruise ship ever, but because of the way it's powered?
Well, good morning, Wilfred. Good morning, everyone. Well, obviously, we started with this technology, LNG, and the design of the ship started 10 years ago. So today we have an LNG, and LNG allows us to use synthetic biofuels. And obviously, this is a huge step ahead. So we reached the capability to prove that in 2023, with a ship, a cruise ship, a large ship, we can actually have a net zero voyage. Like you were correctly saying, the vessel will depart Saint-Nazaire this weekend, going to Copenhagen. And with a mixture of energy saving, itinerary planning, and mass balance of bio-LNG, we actually proving that already in 2023, we can have a ship that has a net zero voyage, which is a huge achievement.
A very big achievement, just on the surface of it. And I mean, how big an improvement is that to the bulk of the fleets that are out there across you and your rivals? Are they far from joining this ship in being net zero?
Look, the point is that we need, for shipping in general, for the maritime industry, the wider maritime industry, we need alternative fuels. So we actually, with LNG, we've done an incredible step ahead, in actually having this very complex piece of machinery, that can be propelled with such innovative fuel. Obviously, if we can have a synthetic e-LNG, if we can have bio-LNG, obviously, and the same can be said for other type of fuels, then obviously the reduction, the impact on the emission, on the greenhouse gas emission could be improved tremendously.
And do you think the fact that you will be able to, as you are today, market this as the most sustainable cruise ever, do you think that will boost demand specifically for this cruise?
Look, Wilfred, cruise as an industry has always been pointed fingers at lately, that we're not doing our job. And I think we didn't communicate good enough in the past. I think there is a lot that we should be proud of what we are doing. When we invest in these complex pieces of machinery, we invest in excess of $1 billion. Obviously, we amortize the ships in 30 years, more or less. And when we design them from the time of delivery, let's say in 3 years' time, we need to understand not only what people will like to eat and how they will want to be entertained in 2030, but obviously we go around the world and we actually put the best technology that is available, for us to understand that we have a commitment, which is net zero in 2050. So many times I say there is a lot of technology, maybe up to 70%, little things. There is not like a miraculous solution, a magic wand that will give us the capability to be net zero. But between many technical advances and obviously with the renewable fuels, with like I was saying, synthetic fuels, biofuels, then we can achieve that 2050. And obviously we need to communicate, because what we are doing with some of the ships, the advanced water treatment, the advanced waste, how we do the recycle waste. We even have a notation for the propellers that, they don't have the sound that disturbs mammals underwater. So we actually noiseless underwater. So we're actually doing incredible technical advances that actually one day they may be utilized, in civil society. And I'm referring, for example, to the fuel cell technology.
And just finally, Pier Francesco, are you seeing demand for your industry broadly back to pre-pandemic levels?
Well, consumer wants to travel. They want to see a sunset. They want to do it from the comfort of their balcony, you know, enjoying a beer and mingling. So yes, consumer wants to go cruising. The value for money of cruising is well understood. We are very competitive to other land-based type of holidays. Ships are full, so we have a very strong and bullish 2023. Which makes us very happy because obviously through the pandemic we've been burning cash. 2022 wasn't that easy, you know, with all the events during the waves booking season. So 23 looks very strong.
Pier Francesco, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wilfred.
Right, Japan has long been established as a big player in the world of whisky, producing award-winning labels that have challenged the Scottish and Irish industries. The Japanese whisky manufacturer Suntory is marking its 100th birthday, and to celebrate, the acclaimed director Sofia Coppola has directed its newest advert with Keanu Reeves, who has a history with the brand. Film fans will remember that the brand featured heavily 2 decades ago in the movie Lost in Translation. Well, joining me now is John Potter, Managing Director at the House of Suntory. Thanks so much for joining us, and congrats on the centenary for the brand. I have to ask, actually, does that put you as a very old manufacturer when it comes to the world of whiskey, or no? I mean, I'm serious. As a brand, are most brands more legacy than that? I mean, there's such a advent of new brands in the spirit space at the moment. I just wonder where it puts you, relatively speaking.
Well, we're probably not as old as some of the Scotch houses, but we are the pioneering house of Japanese whiskey. So we are really the first house from Japan. So I'd say we're still at the start of our journey. We've got a long way to go, and it's been a highly successful 100 years, and we're looking forward to the next 100 years.
I know we've got some pictures of this centenary celebration advert, which perhaps will play over some of the interview. But where do you think you've got in terms of penetrating with the Japanese products? We'll come to some of your other products. The markets abroad, obviously UK, US, you see them a lot more than as recent as 10 years ago. Is it still tip of the iceberg, or have you found that you've made decent progress on that penetration?
Well, it's still tip of the iceberg. And you know, the lovely thing about the House Suntory and the brands like Yamazaki and Hibiki is that the demand is there globally. And so, you know, we're very excited by the opportunity to build these beautiful brands and bring not just Japanese whiskey to the world, but Japanese culture to the world.
And do you purposefully maintain quite a premium brand image and pricing? I mean, they're delicious, but quite expensive.
Well, that's a reflection of demand outstripping supply. So yes, we love our brands to be premium. Our job is to do 2 things. One is actually to maintain that quality. And the second one is actually to supply more to the market. That's complex when you're looking at brands that are 30 years old and 17 and 21 years old. You've got to be thinking long term. So even addressing some of those supply constraints is going to take time.
In terms of the broader company, I mean, of course, it's called Beam Suntory, a merger with Jim Beam some years ago. So there's quite a lot of American whiskies in your fleet of brands too. Do you feel, even though there's been growth in some premium whiskies, do you feel like you've missed out on some of the other areas? I mean, gin, for example, has obviously exploded over the last decade. I mean, do you consider that as a missed opportunity, or how do you think about it?
Well, we think about, again, the opportunity for the House of Suntory is to go beyond whiskey. And we've actually introduced a few years ago a beautiful gin called Roku. It stands for 6, it's 6 botanicals, and it's one of the fastest growing gins in the world. We also have a lovely vodka called Haku. And they are crafted to the same sort of quality standards that we do our whiskies. So we actually view now ourselves as a spirits portfolio with an opportunity to bring Japanese craftsmanship to the world, not just with whiskey, but also with gins and vodkas, etc.
I apologise. I managed to miss those looking at your website this morning, though I did rather appallingly enjoy looking at lots of spirits at 8 a.m. Too much, probably. Touching on that, in fact, where are people's tastes, spirits versus other drinks like wine and beers and others? today, and not just over the long term, but in the pandemic, where we did see quite a surge in demand for spirits as people kind of drunk through the pain of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think the great thing about the spirits industry is one about innovation. And you'll see, innovations from us in Japanese. You'll see innovations in other areas, whether it's ready to drink, whether it's brands with lower alcohol. And it's a fascinating industry that keeps innovating. And that's why I think spirits has got a healthy future, because of this mentality of constantly looking at innovation and satisfying new consumer needs.
Great stuff. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and congrats again on the 100 years, John.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Right, time for a look at this morning's business pages. Let's have a look at some of the key stories. Well, the Financial Times is reporting that WE Soda, the world's largest natural soda ash producer, plans to float in London, providing a boost to a stock market that has, of course, struggled for new listings of late. The Times has a story at how the digital bank Monzo faces a £100 million loss after a rapid increase in lending that has involved a push into the buy now, pay later industry. Obviously, it's a significant blow, but it's a non-cash write-down for Monzo. The business page of The Telegraph leads with a rating agency warning that mortgage rates will tip Britain into recession this year, and a story by our guest today, the country's biggest independent TV producers, going up for sale for more than £1 billion as its owners deal with the streaming revolution. And our guest is Christopher Williams, business editor at The Telegraph. Great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Why don't we kick off on the first leader article in your paper, just in terms of the view that the housing market, mortgage rates could push Britain into recession, because we've had this bifurcation of late where clearly inflation has persisted, and that's bad for the prospect for interest rates. But the only reason interest rates are also forecast to stay high is that the outlook for the economy has not perhaps improved, but got less bad. So this article suggests that that's perhaps a false dawn.
Yeah, I mean, we're going through cycles of optimism and pessimism, I think, around the economy. And I think we're currently dipping into a bit of a pessimistic phase. We've got Moody's in our paper saying that because there are so many people who need to remortgage this year, you're going to get a lot of people having their household income squeezed. That comes alongside Catherine Mann, who's on the MPC at the Bank of England, just giving a fairly gloomy assessment of where they need to go from here. This morning, you've seen Larry Summers, the US economist, saying the UK is going to struggle to avoid recession. So I just think that the situation we're in, where the UK's inflation seems to be becoming more embedded than a lot of rival economies, is convincing some people that we're going to have a slightly tougher time than we thought perhaps 2 months ago. But obviously, these are economists, and it can change.
Yeah, indeed. Christopher, touch on one of your own articles today that we just mentioned there. So which independent TV producer are we talking about? And is this a sale because they're a beneficiary of the streaming market, or because they're threatened by it?
This is All Three Media, who are sort of a conglomeration of 50, actually, independent producers. They're owned by Warner Brothers Discovery, which is one of the big Hollywood studios, and by Liberty Global, who are actually a telecoms operator and part own Virgin Media O2. The sale is partly driven by Warner Brothers Discovery, which is a combination that's been executed in the last year, very indebted, needs to reduce that debt, and doesn't really need to own half of a UK producer anymore, when Warner Brothers is one of the world's biggest producers in its own right. For Liberty Global, which sort of has dabbled in TV on the basis that perhaps there was going to be a sort of convergence of telecoms and television, that hasn't really happened. So both of them are kind of looking around and seeing if they can realise some of the gains that have been made in streaming. Over the last decade, streaming is becoming a tougher business. A lot of the returns aren't as high as people had hoped. So it's just a tougher phase for that industry. All Three Media has done pretty well under its current management, and is likely to be an attractive asset. I think that it also signals a kind of return to corporate activity in London, alongside the float of WE Soda that you mentioned earlier. You're starting to see some of the gears starting to turn again in the city after the banking crisis in the US and our own sort of bond yield problems last year shut things down for a while.
And Christopher, let's just touch as well on the story in the Times about Monzo, of course, one of the sort of fintech darlings of the last 5 years or so here. There was an explosion in the sort of threat that traditional banks face, both sides of the Atlantic and across continental Europe too, from these new fintech players. With this story, is it the latest example that perhaps, whilst the threat's not going away to traditional banking players, that it might have peaked?
I think you would probably struggle to find traditional banks who do see these guys as much of a threat these days. The initial threat was around user experience and technology, and I think a lot of the traditional banks have caught up. And what you're seeing here is these smaller banks going into riskier forms of lending to try and gain scale, which ultimately is the only way you can make money as a bank, is by being large scale. And in this case, Monzo is going to buy now, pay later lending at a time when the consumer is being squeezed, and it's not especially surprising that some of that lending is going to go bad for them.
Christopher, thanks so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
No problem.
Now, President Zelensky has just been speaking at a European summit in Moldova in the last few minutes, just moments ago. Let's listen in.
For Moldovan people, first of all, that you really you hosted all our people, all the refugees from the first days of full-scale war. Thank you. We never forget about it. And I think what is very important, our future in EU, and Ukraine is ready to be in NATO. We are waiting when NATO will be ready to host and to have Ukraine. And I think security guarantees are very important, not only for Ukraine, for our neighbors, for Moldova, because of the Russia and of their aggression in Ukraine and potential aggression for other parts of Europe.
Some brief comments there from President Zelensky, NATO gathering in Moldova, saying he's ready to be in NATO where NATO is ready, important not just for the likes of Ukraine, but for Moldova, the hosts of this summit also. Right, still to come here on Ian King Live, I'll be speaking to the winners of 2 prestigious Women in Business Awards. That's next.
I'm Becky Johnson, a Sky News correspondent, part of the team based here in the Midlands. Allegations of exploitation in Leicester's clothing factories aren't new. In fact, it's been an open secret in this city for years. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
We're getting more and more stabbings, and essentially I think it's more and more younger children. As a team, we're not really surprised by anything these days.
So there's reports of a male who's been stabbed repeatedly in the leg.
Here in the diverse industrial heart of England, we hear from people who have real stories to tell.
Parents are going to complain like this, and schools had better get ready for it.
These protests are being organised primarily by people who aren't parents at the school.
So some patients aren't going to survive this.
We have to be prepared that patients will die from this illness.
Staff here are currently identifying wards that could be turned into areas where patients with COVID-19 could be isolated. The River Severn is still rising, and people here in Ironbridge have been told it could go up by another metre before it starts to go back down.
It's going to be a long, slow process of putting it back together again.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
Welcome back. The co-founder of a food-sharing app has won the prestigious Veuve Clicquot Bold Woman Award. Tessa Clark was praised for her entrepreneurial skills in helping create the app Olio, which is now used by more than 7 million people. And another big winner in last night's awards was Karen Schofield-Seal, founder of Oceanium, which harnesses the benefits of seaweed. She was given the Bold Future Award, which celebrates up-and-coming female leaders of the future. I'm delighted to say that Tessa Clark and Karen Schofield are both with me now. Congratulations to you both, and thank you as well for coming in and following an awards night sponsored by Veuve Clicquot. Very impressive, quick turnaround. Tessa, I'll start with you. So just quickly, what does Olio do?
So Olio is an app that exists to tackle the enormous problem of waste in our homes and local communities, and we do that by connecting people with their neighbours so they can give away things that they no longer want or need rather than waste them or throw them away.
And where are we in the sort of progress of that? How quickly has it changed since you launched the app, and how much further is there to go? How much more food is there that's wasted that could be saved?
So we've had 7 million people join Olio so far, and our community has collectively shared over 100 million portions of food and also 9 million household items. That's had an incredible environmental impact. We've saved over 16 billion litres of water, for example. But we're doing a fraction of our full potential. So we've set ourselves an enormous goal of 1 billion people to be sharing the world's most precious resources by 2030.
Wow, amazing. And Karen, tell us what Oceanium does.
Yes, at Oceanium, we have developed a green proprietary technology which maximizes the value of farm seaweed. So we are looking to catalyze the seaweed farming industry here in the Western Hemisphere. And by doing so, we produce products that are in very high demand by big corporate companies as well as plant-based ingredients, including food ingredients, protein and fiber, nutraceuticals for health and cosmetics, and a ingredient to make innovative circular life cycle materials.
Well, and so what drew you to seaweed being an opportunity for this in the first place?
Yes. So I had recently completed a sustainable business course at Cambridge, and I was doing a lot of research as to where I could start a new business that would have the most impact. And I came across a World Bank report that talked about the numerous environmental, economic, and social benefits of seaweed farming. In food security, it's going to be hugely important going forward for food security. It helps mitigate ocean eutrophication because it absorbs carbon and nitrogen, and importantly, creates jobs along rural coastal regions, alternative livelihoods for fisher communities. And also, I've always been involved with issues with women and girls, and 70% of the aquaculture workforce are women. So it provides economic freedom and agency for women around the world.
Wow, a direct link then from seaweed to that and the awards last night. And obviously, Tessa, these awards are partly because of these brilliant businesses you've outlined, but also specifically for your respective female leadership. Talk us through in your process how important having mentors in your space has been and how you pass that on now.
So mentors, I think, are absolutely critical, but even more important than mentors are role models, and then also money. What we women really, really need is money more than mentors, and access to capital is, I think if you speak to any female founder, is the #1 challenge for them when they're trying to build and scale their businesses. And when we see so many incredible female founders who are tackling some of the world's largest problems and they're struggling to access capital, then by shortchanging women, we're really shortchanging humanity, and that's a very big problem.
And Karen, do you think the whole process of things like the awards ceremony last night, does that make a difference in itself? Is it sort of self-fulfilling, or is it just sort of backward-looking?
No, I think it definitely makes a difference. I think Veuve Clicquot shining a light on women business owners and change makers is a huge benefit for our businesses, because it highlights not only what we're doing, but what the businesses are doing and the impact that they're having. I mean, we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the Veuve Clicquot Award. So I do think that it is really important. And as Tessa said, it also is important for role models, and so that younger women and all women can see that there's an opportunity.
Well, Karen, Tessa, thank you both very much for joining me today. And congrats again on the awards last night. We have time just a quick look in at the markets before we go, and we are having a look at the moment at slight gains here in Europe. FTSE 100 up about 0.5%, continental Europe up more than that, over 1%. That does it for Ian King Live, and Kimberly Leonard has you next.